How does an empire drown? It does not happen with a bang, not always with the dramatic clash of armies on a field of battle. Sometimes it happens with a whisper, the whisper of a quill on a royal decree, the whisper of silk in a counting house, the whisper of 1,000,000,000 pieces of silver flowing in a torrent from a new world to an old one until the very weight of that money drags a colossus to its knees. This is not just the story of Spain's bankruptcy. This is the story of how the world's first global superpower, an empire upon which the sun truly never set, became a slave to the very metal that made it rich. It is a tale of financial alchemy, where gold was transformed into debt and conquest bred a fatal weakness. Our story begins not in the halls of power in Madrid, but in the suffocating depths of a mountain, in Potosí, in the high Andes. Imagine the scene, a barren red mountain, a Cerro Rico, they called it, a city of dust and desperation clinging to its slopes. And inside, in tunnels lit by feeble candlelight, thousands of indigenous laborers toiling in an endless, airless night. With each swing of a pick, they are chipping away at a mountain of pure silver. This silver is the lifeblood, the raw, unrefined power of the Spanish Empire. It is the answer to every prayer a king could utter, or so they believed. Across the ocean, in Seville, the treasure fleets arrive. The great galleons, their hulls low in the water, disgorge their incredible cargo. Chests heavy and iron-bound are hauled through the streets. They are cracked open in the house of trade, and the contents spill out, bars of silver, so pure they seem to glow with a cold, malevolent light. For the kings of Spain, Charles V, and later his son Philip II, this was divine providence. God had delivered the wealth of the Americas into their pious hands. Their ambitions were as vast as their empire: to crush the Reformation in Europe, to fight the Ottoman Turks in the Mediterranean, to build palaces that would dwarf imagination. The silver of Potosí was the engine that would make it all possible. And for a time it worked. Spanish tercio infantry, the best in the world, were paid with this silver. The great armada was built with it. The court at Madrid became a spectacle of unparalleled opulence. Spain was the undisputed master of the world, its influence stretching from the fields of Flanders to the ports of Manila. The river of silver seemed endless, a perpetual motion machine of power. But a terrible illusion was at work.
You see, the Spanish crown made a fatal miscalculation. They believed that wealth was the same thing as money. They saw the silver, the physical metal, as the source of their strength, and so they spent it. They spent it with a recklessness that history has rarely seen. They did not build factories. They did not foster a thriving domestic industry. Why make cloth when you can buy the finest from Flanders with a sliver of a silver bar? Why build a complex economy when you can simply tax the river of treasure flowing into your ports? The empire became a giant, a consumer nation living on imports, all funded by its American mines. And the silver began to flow out of Spain as fast as it flowed in. It flowed to Genoese bankers to pay for the crown's massive loans. It flowed to English merchants for woolens, to German arms makers for cannons, to the Dutch for ships and grain. Spain was not creating wealth. It was merely acting as a conduit, a temporary holder of a global currency. And with every coin that left its shores, a little of its real power leaked away. Then came the debts. The ambitions of an empire are always more expensive than its income, even an income of literal mountains of silver. Wars are catastrophically costly. To fund his endless campaigns, King Philip II did what so many have done before and since. He borrowed. He borrowed from German bankers, from Italian financiers. He issued bonds, juros, promising future streams of silver from the Americas as collateral. The Spanish crown became the world's biggest, most credit-worthy borrower, but it was a house of cards built on the assumption that the silver would never stop. And then it would falter. A storm would sink a treasure fleet. A rebellion in the Netherlands would require another army, another fortune. The crown's response was always the same: borrow more against the next fleet, the next year's haul from the mines. The interest piled up. The debt became a monster, growing in the dark, feeding on the very treasure that was meant to slay it. The first bankruptcy came in 1557. It was a shockwave through the financial system of Europe. Philip II simply declared that he could not pay his debts. He forced his bankers to renegotiate, to extend his loans. He had stolen from them, but he was the king, the master of the new world. So what could they do? They grumbled, they accepted the losses, and then, dazzled by the promise of more silver, they lent to him again. This pattern repeated itself, again in 1560, 1575, 1996. Each time, the crown wiped its slate clean, but its reputation, the trust that is the true foundation of credit, was crumbling. The final tragic irony was inflation. All that silver flooding into Europe was not making the continent richer in real terms. It was just making money more plentiful. The same bag of grain began to cost more and more silver coins. The value of money itself was being eroded. They called it the price revolution. In Spain, this was a disaster. The cost of everything, of food, of supplies for the army, of maintaining the court, skyrocketed. But the crown's income, tied to fixed taxes and the finite amount of silver it could physically ship, could not keep up. They were being strangled by the very metal they had conquered a hemisphere to obtain.
By the late 1500s, the empire was a ghost of its former self. Its armies were still formidable, its culture still brilliant, but the financial life had been sucked out of it. The government was a zombie, shambling from one bankruptcy to the next, its policies dictated not by strategy, but by the desperate need to service its debts. The river of silver had become a tidal wave that drowned the very state it was meant to float. So, how does an empire drown? It drowns in plain sight. It drowns in a flood of its own supposed wealth. The story of Spain's bankruptcy is the ultimate cautionary tale of mistaking money for power. The silver was real, the galleons were real, the conquests were real. But the foundation was rotten. They built a global empire on a foundation of debt and consumption, believing that the influx of precious metal was a substitute for a productive economy. They failed to understand that true, lasting power does not come from what you can extract from the ground, but from what you can build with your hands and your minds. The legacy of the Spanish Empire is a lesson written in tarnished silver. It teaches us that the most dangerous poison for a nation is not poverty, but a sudden, overwhelming fortune handled without wisdom. It is a lesson about the seductive, destructive nature of easy money, a reminder that the weight of gold can be heavier than the weight of iron, and that the chains of debt are often forged in the very minds that promise freedom. The empire upon which the sun never set ultimately was bankrupted by the dawn.